Aubrey Simmons sighed as she spread out her checkered blanket on the soft grass by the lake, the late afternoon sun casting a golden hue over the rippling water. This was her favorite spot, quiet, peaceful, her little escape from the chaos of everyday life. She unpacked her picnic basket, laying out a simple meal: a turkey sandwich, fresh strawberries, and a bottle of lemonade. Just as she settled in, she noticed a tall, well-dressed man standing a few feet away, looking around as if searching for something. "Are you lost?" she asked, tilting her head curiously. The man turned, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. He had sharp, striking features, and his dark hair was slightly tousled, giving him an effortlessly handsome look. "Not exactly," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I was hoping to find a quiet place to sit, but it seems every bench is taken." Aubrey glanced around. He wasn't wrong. Families, joggers, and couples had claimed most of the spots along the lake. Without thinking twice, she scooted over and gestured to the empty space beside her. "You can sit here if you want. I don't mind sharing." He hesitated for a moment before sitting down, smoothing out his crisp button-down shirt. "That's generous of you." "I'd like to think I'm a generous person," she said with a small smile. "I'm Aubrey. Elijah Hastings," he replied, shaking her hand briefly. His grip was firm, his touch warm. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the gentle sound of the lake lapping against the shore filling the space between them. Aubrey took a bite of her sandwich, then glanced at Elijah, who was simply staring out at the water. "You didn't bring any food?" she asked. He let out a low chuckle. "No, I wasn't planning on staying long." Aubrey considered this, then held out a strawberry. "Here. Everyone deserves a snack." Elijah looked at the small red fruit in her hand, then at her. There was something unreadable in his expression before he took it from her fingers. "Thank you." As they ate, they talked nothing too personal, just light conversation. Aubrey learned that Elijah worked in business, though he was vague about the details. He asked about her job and she laughed, explaining that she worked as a freelance illustrator. "So, you draw for a living?" he asked, intrigued. "Pretty much," she said. "Mostly book covers, some magazine illustrations. It's not always stable, but I love it." There was something in the way he listened to her that made her feel seen, as if her words actually mattered. It was rare to find that in a stranger. The sun began to set, painting the sky in pinks and oranges. Aubrey sighed happily. "This is the best part of the day." Elijah followed her gaze. "It's beautiful." She turned to look at him, only to find him already watching her. Her breath hitched. There was something intense in his eyes, something unreadable yet captivating. "Well," she said, breaking the moment, "I should probably pack up." Elijah stood as she started gathering her things. "Would you like some help?" She shook her head. "I got it, but thanks." As she folded her blanket, she felt his gaze still on her. When she finally looked back up, he smiled a small, genuine smile that made her stomach flip. "Thank you for sharing your spot," he said. She shrugged. "Anytime." He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black business card. "If you ever want to have an actual meal instead of just strawberries and sandwiches, call me." Aubrey took the card, her fingers brushing against his. She glanced at the embossed name, Elijah Hastings, Hastings Enterprises. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she didn't dwell on it. She looked back up at him, smiling. "We'll see." Elijah chuckled, a deep, rich sound. "I'll hope for a yes." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Aubrey standing there, holding the card, completely unaware that she had just shared a picnic spot with a millionaire who was already thinking about seeing her again. Aubrey stared at the sleek black business card resting on her nightstand, the name Elijah Hastings gleaming under the soft glow of her bedside lamp. It had been 3 days since their chance meeting by the lake, and she still found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit. There was something about him, his quiet confidence, the way he listened when she spoke, the way his gaze lingered just a second too long. She had debated calling him, but something held her back. He had an air of importance, the kind of man who probably had a schedule packed with high-powered meetings and luxurious events. What would he want with a freelance illustrator who spent her afternoons sketching by the water? And yet, she found herself dialing the number before she could talk herself out of it. It rang once. Twice. Hello. His voice was deeper over the phone, smooth like velvet. It's Aubrey, she said, suddenly feeling ridiculous. From the lake. The pause that followed was brief, but when he spoke again, there was unmistakable warmth in his tone. I was hoping you'd call. A small, unexpected smile tugged at her lips. Well, here I am. Are you free tomorrow evening? She hesitated, chewing her lip. Depends. What's the plan? I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere nice. Aubrey exhaled softly. He didn't ask, he stated. It wasn't arrogance, though. It was certainty. All right, she said. But just so you know, I'm not the high heels and cocktail dress type. I'll keep that in mind, he said, amusement laced in his voice. I'll pick you up at 7. The following evening, Aubrey stood outside her apartment building, the evening air crisp against her skin. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, the kind of vehicle that looked like it belonged in a movie rather than on the quiet street where she lived. The driver stepped out and opened the door, but it wasn't him. Elijah, she said as he emerged from the back seat, dressed in a tailored navy suit that made him look even more impossibly refined than before. You look beautiful, he said, his gaze sweeping over her. She glanced down at her outfit, simple yet elegant. A soft blue dress that flowed just enough to make her feel like she'd made an effort. I clean up all right, she teased. He opened the car door wider. Shall we? The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, sleek leather seats, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. You didn't mention a driver, she noted as the car pulled away from the curb. He leaned back, watching her with a glint of amusement. Would it have changed your mind about coming? No, she admitted. But I would have asked what exactly it is you do. He considered her for a moment before answering. I run a company. Investments, acquisitions, that sort of thing. Sounds intense. It can be. She studied him, the way he carried himself, composed, confident, like a man accustomed to control. Yet there was something else beneath that polished exterior. Something unreadable. The car pulled up to a restaurant that looked as if it had been plucked straight from a European postcard, its exterior glowing warmly under the city lights. This is fancy, she murmured as he led her inside. The maitre d' greeted him by name, whisking them to a private table near a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Aubrey took her seat, glancing around. All right, Hastings. You weren't kidding about somewhere nice. He smiled. I wanted to impress you. The words sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She reached for the menu, scanning the selections before setting it down. Be honest. Do you actually eat here often? Or did you pick this place just for the effect? His lips twitched. I've been here before, but tonight is different. She tilted her head. Why? Because I'm here with you. Aubrey felt warmth creep up her neck. She wasn't used to this, someone being so direct, so unwavering in their interest. You don't seem like a man who does things without purpose, she said, watching him carefully. I don't, he agreed. That's why I asked you to dinner. A waiter appeared, and Elijah ordered a bottle of wine before turning his attention back to her. So, tell me something I don't know about you, he said. She drummed her fingers against the table, considering. I have a terrible habit of staying up too late when I'm drawing. I get lost in it. I can see that, he mused. You strike me as someone who gets lost in what she loves. His words were more perceptive than she expected. What about you? What's something people wouldn't guess? He leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. I don't particularly enjoy the world I operate in. That caught her off guard. Then why do it? He exhaled slowly. Because sometimes, duty outweighs desire. Aubrey studied him, sensing there was more to that statement than he was letting on. But before she could press further, the waiter returned with their wine, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. By the time dessert arrived, she found herself laughing at his dry humor, the initial formality between them replaced with something easier, something real. As the evening wound down, Elijah settled the bill with a flick of his wrist, and when they stepped outside, The city lights cast everything in a soft glow. I had a good time, she admitted. He turned to face her fully. So did I. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a quiet certainty, he reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I'd like to see you again, he said. Aubrey swallowed, her pulse picking up. You don't waste time, do you? I don't see the point, he said simply. She searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity. All right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A slow smile spread across his lips. As the car pulled up once more, she climbed in, stealing one last glance at him before the door closed. And as the city blurred past her window, she couldn't shake the feeling that her quiet world had just collided with something far bigger than she'd ever imagined. Aubrey hadn't expected to see Elijah again so soon, but 2 days after their dinner, he called and invited her to an art exhibit downtown. The invitation surprised her not because he wanted to see her again, but because it wasn't some high-profile, exclusive event. It was a gallery showing for a rising local artist, the kind of place she'd normally visit on her own. Now, standing beside him in the softly lit space, surrounded by abstract paintings and hushed murmurs of other guests, she found herself studying him more than the art. He had an ease about him, moving through the crowd with quiet confidence. But what intrigued her most was that he seemed genuinely interested in the pieces, pausing to take in each one instead of just making polite observations. You have a particular favorite? She asked, tilting her head toward him. Elijah's gaze lingered on a striking canvas, a blend of deep blues and gold, chaotic yet purposeful. This one, he said, nodding toward it. There's something about the contrast. It's turbulent, but there's balance in the chaos. Aubrey considered the painting, then glanced at him. That's an interesting way to put it. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. What do you see? She studied the brushstrokes, the way the colors bled into each other. It feels like a gamble. Like the artist wasn't sure how it would turn out, but they went for it anyway. Elijah's lips curved slightly. I like that. Something about the way he said it made her stomach flutter. A voice interrupted them. Elijah Hastings, as I live and breathe. Aubrey turned to see a man approaching, tall, sharply dressed, carrying himself with the same air of wealth and power that Elijah did. But where Elijah's presence was controlled, this man's was more overt, like he enjoyed making an entrance. Elijah, the man continued, clapping him on the shoulder. Didn't think I'd run into you here? His gaze slid to Aubrey, curiosity sparking in his eyes. And who is this? Before she could introduce herself, Elijah spoke. Aubrey Simmons. His tone was polite but firm. The man extended a hand. Daniel Crest. Old friend of Elijah's. Aubrey shook it, sensing something unspoken between the two men. I didn't peg you for an art enthusiast, Daniel said, turning back to Elijah. This isn't your usual scene. Elijah's jaw tightened just slightly. People change. Daniel let out an amused hum. Do they? His eyes flicked to Aubrey again, something calculating in his gaze. How did you two meet? Aubrey opened her mouth to answer, but Elijah beat her to it. By the lake. The way he said it left no room for further questions. Daniel seemed to pick up on the underlying message, but instead of pressing, he gave a slow nod. Well, I won't keep you. Enjoy the exhibit. As he walked away, Aubrey turned to Elijah. That was interesting. Elijah exhaled, his expression unreadable. Daniel and I go back a long way. She studied him, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. Not in a good way? We've had our differences, he admitted. Aubrey didn't push, sensing this wasn't a topic he wanted to dwell on. Instead, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. It was a bold move, but she wanted to ground him, to remind him that whatever history he shared with Daniel didn't have to define this moment. Elijah glanced down at their joined hands, then back at her. His tension eased, his grip tightening just enough to let her know he appreciated it. Let's see the rest of the exhibit, she said, giving his hand a light squeeze. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but instead he simply nodded and led her deeper into the gallery. Later that night, he drove her home, the city lights casting a glow over the quiet streets. When they reached her apartment, he walked her to the door, his presence steady beside her. I had a good time tonight, she said, looking up at him. So did I, he murmured. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Then, without thinking too much about it, Aubrey rose onto her toes and brushed a soft kiss against his cheek. She felt the way his breath hitched, the way his fingers curled slightly at his sides. When she pulled back, he caught her wrist gently. Aubrey. The way he said her name sent warmth spreading through her chest. She met his gaze, waiting. Elijah exhaled as if weighing something in his mind. Then, with deliberate slowness, he bent his head and kissed her, not rushed, not demanding, but with intent. His lips were warm, his touch gentle yet firm, and Aubrey felt herself melt into him, her fingers curling against his jacket. When they finally pulled apart, her pulse was unsteady, and from the way he looked at her, she knew he felt it too. I want to see you again, he said, his voice lower than before. Aubrey smiled, her heart still racing. Good. Because I want that too. Elijah's lips curved ever so slightly. Then, with one last lingering look, he stepped back, letting her unlock her door. As she slipped inside, she leaned against the door for a moment, pressing her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. Whatever this was between them, it was no longer something casual. And somehow that didn't scare her at all. Aubrey stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the delicate chain around her neck. The pendant was small but elegant, a gift from Elijah that had arrived earlier that day with a handwritten note. It hadn't been anything overly extravagant, just a simple token, but the thought behind it made her chest tighten. He listened. He paid attention. She hadn't expected to fall this fast. She also hadn't expected Elijah Hastings to be the kind of man who could make her feel like the only person in the world when he looked at her. But here she was, standing in her apartment, anticipation buzzing through her as she awaited his arrival. The soft knock at her door sent a rush of warmth through her. When she opened it, Elijah stood there, his presence filling the small space effortlessly. He was dressed in a crisp black coat over a fitted sweater, his usual air of control softened by the way he looked at her. You wear it well, he said, his gaze dipping briefly to the necklace. She touched the pendant lightly. It's beautiful. Thank you. His fingers brushed against hers as he reached out, his touch lingering. I wanted you to have something from me. Something small, but meaningful. She swallowed, her heart kicking up its pace. You keep doing that. He raised a brow. Doing what? Making it impossible not to fall for you. A slow, deliberate expression crossed his face. Something deeper than amusement. Then don't fight it. Her breath caught, but before she could respond, he took her hand and led her outside. The evening air was cool as they strolled through the quiet streets. Instead of a driver waiting at the curb, Elijah guided her toward a sleek motorcycle parked by the sidewalk. She blinked at it. This is new. He handed her a helmet, his lips curving just slightly. Thought I'd surprise you. Aubrey ran her fingers over the polished surface before looking up at him. I didn't picture you as a motorcycle guy. There are a lot of things you don't know about me yet. She fastened the helmet, letting him help her onto the back of the bike. The moment she wrapped her arms around his waist, she felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Hold on, he murmured. The engine roared to life, and they took off through the city, weaving through the streets with effortless precision. The wind rushed past her, but all she could focus on was the solid warmth of Elijah in front of her, the way he moved, the way he never hesitated. When they finally pulled to a stop, Aubrey realized where they were, the lake. The same place they had met. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and a soft glow from hidden lanterns illuminated a small wooden dock stretching over the water. A blanket was spread out at the end, along with a small basket. You planned this, she said, stepping off the bike. Elijah removed his helmet, shaking out his hair before meeting her gaze. I figured it was only fair. You shared your picnic spot with me. Now I get to return the favor. Warmth bloomed in her chest as she took his hand and walked toward the dock. The night air was crisp, but the atmosphere was perfect. As they settled onto the blanket, Elijah pulled out a bottle of wine and poured them each a glass. Aubrey leaned back on her elbows, looking at him. You really don't do anything halfway, do you? He turned his body toward her, his knee brushing against hers. Not when it comes to you. Her pulse fluttered. You say things like that so easily. That's because I mean them. She studied him, searching for any trace of hesitation, but there was none. Elijah Hastings was not a man who played games. She exhaled softly. This is terrifying, she admitted. His brows furrowed slightly. Why? Because I wasn't looking for this. I wasn't expecting you. Elijah reached out, brushing his fingers along her jaw. Neither was I. She turned her face into his palm, closing her eyes for a moment. But it's happening anyway. He tilted her chin up, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Let it. The words settled deep within her, dissolving whatever resistance she had left. So she did. When he kissed her, it wasn't hurried or desperate. It was steady, sure, the kind of kiss that anchored her to something she hadn't even realized she'd been missing. She gripped his sweater, pulling him closer, and he responded with a quiet intensity that made the world around them disappear. When they finally pulled away, her forehead rested against his, both of them breathing slightly heavier than before. Elijah let out a soft chuckle. "You keep making it impossible not to fall for you, too." Aubrey smiled, brushing her fingers through his hair. "Then don't fight it." His arms tightened around her, and under the moonlight, with the lake reflecting the stars above, she realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. Because this whatever it was real. And she didn't want to let it go. Aubrey stood in her small studio, the scent of paint and paper filling the air as she worked on her latest commission. The soft hum of music played from her speaker, but her mind wasn't entirely on the canvas in front of her. Instead, it kept drifting to Elijah, to the way he had looked at her by the lake, to the way he had kissed her like she was something rare, something worth holding onto. It had been a week since that night, and every moment since had been filled with him. Late-night calls that stretched into the early hours. Unexpected visits where he'd bring her coffee, just the way she liked it. Quiet walks through the city where conversation flowed as easily as the breeze. She hadn't expected it to feel this natural. But it did. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Elijah stood there, his presence filling the space as effortlessly as always. He was dressed more casually than usual, dark jeans, a fitted sweater, but there was still an undeniable elegance to him, a confidence in the way he carried himself. He held up a small paper bag. "You forgot to eat lunch again." Aubrey folded her arms, raising a brow. "And how would you know that?" He stepped inside, setting the bag on her counter. "Because every time you get lost in your work, you forget everything else." She reached for the bag, pulling out a sandwich and a small container of fruit. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," he said simply. That was the thing about Elijah, he never did anything out of obligation. If he cared, he showed it without hesitation. As she took a bite of the sandwich, he glanced around her studio, eyes tracing the half-finished sketches pinned to the walls. He stepped closer to one in particular, a piece she had been working on for herself, not a commission. It was softer than her usual work, more personal. He studied it for a moment before speaking. "This one is different from the others." She swallowed, wiping her hands on a napkin. "It's not for anyone. Just something I started one night." His fingers brushed lightly over the edge of the paper. "It feels like you." She tilted her head, intrigued. "And what does that mean?" Elijah turned to her, his expression unreadable. "It means there's something honest about it. Like it wasn't made for approval or sale just because you needed to create it." Her throat tightened slightly. "That's the whole point of art, isn't it?" His gaze held hers. "Maybe, but not everyone creates for themselves. Some people only create for the world." Aubrey set her sandwich down, wiping her fingers. "And what about you? Do you ever do something just for yourself?" A flicker of something crossed his face, just a shadow of hesitation. Then he exhaled. "Not often." She stepped closer. "Why not?" His jaw tightened slightly as if he was weighing his words. "Because for a long time, my life wasn't my own. It belonged to expectations, to responsibilities." Aubrey studied him, sensing the weight behind his words. "And now?" A beat passed before he spoke. "Now, I'm trying to change that." The quiet honesty in his voice sent warmth through her chest. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. His grip tightened around hers, just enough for her to know he needed it. She didn't press him for more. She didn't need to. Instead, she pulled him toward the couch in the corner of the studio, nudging him to sit beside her. "Stay for a while," she said softly. Elijah exhaled as if something in him had eased. "I was hoping you'd ask." And so he did. They sat there, the afternoon light pouring in through the windows, the world outside slowing for a little while. And for the first time in a long time, Aubrey felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Aubrey stepped out onto the rooftop terrace, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she took in the breathtaking view of the city skyline. Soft golden lights illuminated the space, casting a warm glow over the elegantly set table at the center. Beyond it, the world stretched out beneath them, the distant hum of traffic blending with the faint sounds of music drifting from the speakers. She turned to Elijah, who stood beside her, his presence steady and certain. He had planned this evening without telling her the details, only saying that he wanted her to trust him. And so she had. "You really don't do anything small, do you?" she said, glancing at the perfectly arranged table, complete with candles and a bottle of wine waiting to be poured. Elijah's lips curved slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Not when it comes to you." Warmth spread through her chest, and she took a slow breath to steady herself. She had fallen for him deeply, irrevocably, and there was no use pretending otherwise. He pulled out a chair for her, and as she sat, he poured them each a glass of wine before settling across from her. The flickering candlelight reflected in his deep blue eyes, making them seem even more intense than usual. For a while, they simply talked about everything and nothing. He told her about the places he had traveled to, the cities he had seen, and the moments that had stayed with him. She told him about the dreams she had as a child, how she used to sketch on the back of old receipts because she couldn't afford proper sketchbooks. Elijah listened the way he always did, with his full attention, as if every word she spoke mattered. As the evening stretched on, a comfortable silence settled between them. Aubrey traced the rim of her glass, searching for the right words to say what had been building inside her for weeks. "Elijah," she started, her voice softer than usual. "You once told me that your life wasn't entirely your own, that it belonged to expectations." His expression shifted slightly, something unreadable flickering across his face. "I did." She met his gaze, unwavering. "And now?" He exhaled slowly, setting his glass down. "Now I know what I want. And for the first time, I don't care about the expectations." Her heartbeat quickened. "And what is it that you want?" Elijah stood, rounding the table until he was in front of her. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and certain. "You," he said, his voice steady. "Only you." Aubrey's breath caught as he slowly lowered himself onto one knee. She gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Elijah pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, flipping it open to reveal a stunning ring, a delicate band with a single, radiant diamond. It wasn't overly grand, not something meant to impress the world, but something chosen with care, something that felt like them. "I never expected you, Aubrey," he said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "But you changed everything. You made me see life differently. You made me want more than just success and control. You made me want love." Tears pricked at her eyes as he continued. "I don't want a life dictated by obligations or expectations. I want a life with you, a life where we chase what makes us happy, where we build something real. Marry me." Aubrey's heart felt like it might burst. There was no hesitation, no doubt. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "Yes, Elijah." Relief and something even deeper flashed in his eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then, before she could say another word, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the kind of certainty that left no room for anything else. The city lights blurred around them, the world fading until there was only them. The wedding was small but breathtaking, set on the edge of a quiet vineyard overlooking rolling hills. The air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers, the soft hum of music drifting through the evening breeze. Elijah stood at the altar, watching as Aubrey walked toward him, her dress flowing around her like something out of a dream. He had never believed in fate, never thought himself the kind of man who would want something as traditional as this. But as she smiled at him, her eyes shining, he knew this was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. When she reached him, he took her hands, his grip firm and unwavering. "I will love you," he vowed, his voice steady. "Every day, in every way. No matter what comes, I will always choose you." Aubrey's eyes glistened as she spoke in return. "And I will love you. Without hesitation, without fear. You are my home, my heart, my choice. Every day." As they exchanged rings, sealing their promises, Elijah leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that spoke of forever. The guests cheered, the world spun on, but all he cared about was the woman in his arms, the woman who had changed everything. And as they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, Aubrey squeezed his fingers and whispered, "You were worth the risk." Elijah smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "So were you." And together, they stepped into forever.